In 1936, a Jewish man named Walter Jenck escaped from Nazi Germany and settled here in England, in Dorset. Of the very few items of luggage he brought with him, one was an old oil painting. Jenck entrusted it to his friend, who lived in a farmhouse near Shaftesbury, and there the painting remained for the duration of the war. So it's true, for some time Bach did reside in Dorset, and that was perhaps the closest I thought I'd ever get to him. That is, until today. In J.S. Bach's honour, I've come to the most majestic village church in Dorset. This is St James Kingston, 150 years old, yet based on designs from ancient Gothic masterpieces. It took 6 years to complete, cost the equivalent of at least as many millions of pounds, and stands proudly on a limestone escarpment 500 feet above sea level. The tower has been battered and bruised by the elements since 1880, but after significant repairs it remains a glorious sight, visible for miles around and commanding views of Corfe Castle, Poole Harbour and beyond. This church was originally a private chapel for Lord Eldon, his family and his employees. But in 1922 it was passed to public use, and now serves as an impressive, albeit oversized, village church. As I'm sure you can imagine, I am in total awe at this church. A building of cathedral-esque proportions in a tiny Dorset village. You can see why I'd come here to perform Bach, can't you? Because those two facets, the monumental and the intimate, really sum up his repertoire. The organ here is huge, but it's very well hidden, and we have to head into this south transept to see it in its full majesty. That said, it looks terrifying in the gloom of the south transept. Above us, the great mass of the church tower. An extraordinary building. St James's Church in Kingston was of course built as a family chapel, but the organ there is one of the few instruments that I'd say was more of a concert instrument. In other words, it can play more than just hymns. It was built bespoke for this church, and as a result it's been very carefully and ingeniously positioned. You can hardly see it when you walk into the church. And some of the mechanics of this instrument, such as the wind chest and other components, are hidden in crypts underneath the chancel. That makes it very difficult to maintain this organ. It was last restored about 30 years ago and inaugurated in a recital by Peter Herford. But since then it's kind of deteriorated again, I'm afraid. It's certainly in need of tuning, and there are various issues with the organ as a whole. Today is all about J.S. Bach, but there is something remarkable on this organ that I had to demonstrate, and that is a stop called Vox Humana, which means human voice. I've never seen one of these on a church organ that I've played. And though it isn't in very good shape, apparently the pipework was built by a very famous organ builder called Cavalier Cole. If you don't know who that is, well, he built the organ at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. So I just had to try out this stop. Cavaillé Vox Humana stop, followed by the 4-foot flute on the grate, which is said to be one of the best sounds on this organ. I'd now like to turn to the subject of today's video, J.S. Bach, with a hymn tune which he harmonized. Listen very carefully, because this melody is one of the most important tunes in Bach's entire biography. wenn wir in höchsten Nöten sein, or in the hour of utmost need. That melody was not composed by J.S. Bach, it was written back in the 1500s, but he is the one who harmonized it. In other words, he added all those lower parts which I was playing with my left hand and with my feet. Those would be sung by a choir, so that the whole chorale melody and its accompaniment could be sung by a 4-part choir in a service. And Bach was a genius at harmonizing melodies skillfully. However, as well as harmonizing these hymn tunes, he also turned them into organ pieces called chorale preludes, perhaps to play during the service. And if the evidence of his son is correct, then the hymn tune we've just heard preoccupied Bach up until his final hours, because it was the subject of the very last piece of music he ever composed. When Bach sat for the famous Haussmann portrait in 1748, he had barely 2 years to live. His health was failing him, and so was his eyesight. Twice he'd undergo primitive cataract surgery, which eventually rendered him blind. But for now, he continued to work, and he'd reached a climax in a massive musical project, later called the Art of Fugue. Art of Fugue still exists in Bach's own hand, and we can see the strain of his writing as he toiled to complete it. But time ran out for Bach, and even as his will surged on, the music suddenly stopped. This is one of the most important manuscripts in the entire history of mankind. It appears to show the very last music which Johann Sebastian Bach ever wrote. And the aura of this final page is greatly increased by the note written by his son afterwards, just after that final bar, which says, in translation, while working on this fugue, where the name Bach is introduced as a counter-subject, the author died. He is right. Bach in musical terms is B flat, A, C, B natural. And Bach did, in fact, use it as one of his counterpoint subjects. However, surely we cannot take Bach's son's words literally, because how on earth would Bach have written this when he was blind? He had completely lost his eyesight in these final months of his life. So perhaps we need to look elsewhere to find the last piece of music which J.S. Bach ever composed. And we need to return once again to CPE, Bach's son, and now to the first published edition of The Art of Fugue, which was made after Bach died in 1751. J.S. Bach's son, CPE Bach, took charge of his father's affairs after his death, and one of his priorities was to see The Art of Fugue through to publication. He was aware that such a substantial piece would be unacceptable in its unfinished state, so he sought a solution. At the very end of the first edition, he included a short organ piece, claiming it had been dictated by his father on the spur of the moment shortly before he died. If Bach's son was telling the truth, then this piece holds enormous significance. This short piece of music, which has nothing to do with the Art of Fugue, it really shouldn't be in this manuscript. It could potentially be the last piece of music J.S. Bach ever composed. And you've guessed it, it's based on that hymn tune I played you earlier. It exists in 2 different manuscripts. The first one is this, but there's also a fragment of it in a second manuscript, but the title is different. The title in this second manuscript, Vor deinem Thron, I herewith step before thy throne, O God, and humbly beg thee, turn not thy gracious countenance from me, a poor sinner. Those words in the German fit exactly with that hymn tune melody, and perhaps it was these words which Bach had in mind when he supposedly dictated the music from his deathbed. J.S. Bach's so-called Deathbed Chorale. If it really is true that this was dictated in his final days, well, it's a great wonder how that was achieved. He couldn't sit down and play. He couldn't check what had been written by the copyist. And all this is even more extraordinary when you look at how complicated this piece of music is. Listening to it, there is a veneer of simplicity, isn't there? It's very gentle. But it's only once you look at the score where you realise the true genius of this piece of music. I was playing the chorale melody, the tune. I was playing that on the open diapason so that you could hear it clearly. But everything I was playing on the top keyboard, the swell, was Bach's composed sections. And we might call them episodes. Each of these little episodes is a piece in itself. It begins with a theme which is based on part of the hymn tune. And then, extraordinarily, that theme is answered a few beats later by its mirror image. So Bach flips the notes the other way round. So if the original tune rises, the answer falls. This is called inversion, and it's one of Bach's trademarks. The original melody is heard first, followed by its mirror image. Both themes are combined, developed, and they work their way into an accompaniment to the chorale melody. All of this is playable by a single organist. You can see from that short demonstration how Bach has constructed this music. Every single line is essential. Nothing is superfluous. It's not simply a tune with accompaniment like Mozart might do. This is counterpoint, the weaving of independent lines, and that is the form which J.S. Bach considered to be closest to heaven. I'm going to end today's video by performing the chorale melody and J.S. Bach's final reworking of it in their entirety. If you've enjoyed learning about J.S. Bach, seeing just a little bit of how his mind worked, and also gazing upon the amazing views from St. James's Church, then do remember to subscribe to this channel. It doesn't cost you anything, but you'll be first to see where I go next week. If you'd like to, you can also support me with a small donation. If you look underneath this video, you'll see my PayPal link there, and from there you can leave me a small contribution. If you're enjoying my films, and if you love listening to the music as much as I adore playing it, thank you so much. So with that in mind, let's end with the most heavenly music of all from St. James's Church in Kingston in Dorset. Thanks so much for watching. Cheerio.